This week, Peter Kaloroumakis from MITRE is with us to discuss the MITRE Defend project. Then Lynn Dome from Women in Cybersecurity joins us to talk about why the growth of women in cybersecurity has slowed. Finally, in the enterprise security news, a final few fundings before the year closes out. Arctic Wolf buys Cylance from BlackBerry for cheap, a sentence that feels very weird to say. The quiet HTTPS revolution, passkeys are really catching on. Resilience keeps showing up in the titles of news items. What sucks in security? We have the details. Apple Intelligence insults the BBC's intelligence. MITRE ATT&CK avows drama. LastPass breach drama continues. And some actual squirrels in this week's Squirrel Stories. All that and more in this episode of Enterprise Security Weekly.
This is a Security Weekly production for security professionals by security professionals. Please visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to all the shows on our network.
It's the show where we talk security vendors and aren't afraid to name names. It's Enterprise Security Weekly. BigID is the leading data security posture management, or DSPM, vendor, and they do DSPM differently. DSPM centers around risk management and how organizations need to assess, understand, identify, and remediate data security risks across their data. BigID seamlessly integrates with your existing tech stack and helps you uncover dark data, identify and reduce risk, take action through remediation, and scale your data security strategy. BigID is reshaping the future of data security, and CB Insights named BigID the leader in DSPM and the most disruptive cybersecurity software in the space. Visit securityweekly.com/BigID to learn more. ThreatLocker implements a least privileged approach to cybersecurity, blocking every executable unless specifically authorized by your team. This methodology mitigates ransomware, supply chain attacks, and zero-day exploits. It ensures 24/7, 365 protection for your organization. To learn more about how ThreatLocker can help prevent known and unknown threats in your digital environment, safeguard your data and operations from threat actors, and align your organization with compliance frameworks, visit securityweekly.com/ThreatLocker. Welcome to Enterprise Security Weekly and happy National Regifting Day. This is episode 388, recorded on Thursday, December 18th, 2024. I'm your host, Adrian Sanabria, and regifting, it wasn't really clear in what that means, but I get the sense that, maybe people are taking last year's gifts that they didn't use and regifting them. I know my kids actually have piles of Christmas gifts from last year that they have never opened. So I don't know if they're planning on doing that with those. But it's not so much that they didn't like them. They just forgot about them, I have adult children. So, they have jobs and stuff now. They're worried about other things. All right. Let's get to our first interview here. Welcome to the show, Peter. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, and getting ready for Christmas. I don't know if I would get away with regifting to my kids. I think they might pick up on it, and I might get in trouble.
Yeah. It's you got to be strategic about regifting. You've got to like it can't go to the same person that it came from, obviously. So you have to be very careful there.
So thank you for inviting me on, and I'm excited to talk about some of the things we're cooking up with the future of the Defend project and our upcoming 1.0 release.
Yeah, absolutely. And you kind of, I'm doing things a little bit backwards today. It's the last one of the year. My brain isn't fully with me. I was saying just before we started recording that my brain has decided to drop anchor before I got into port, before I'm ready for vacation, because it knows today is my last working day of the year. So exactly. We're going to talk about the 1.0 milestone. I'm excited that we get to do it on this podcast, that you chose to share that with us. And just a quick bio for people who don't know Peter. He is the principal cybersecurity engineer at MITRE on this particular project. And the Defend project is funded by the National Security Agency, which I did not realize.
That's right. They've been funding it actually since a little bit, of course, before 2021, which was the original release of Defend. We released it in June of 2021 after spending a few years actually building it kind of quietly behind the scenes and trying to figure out how we were going to organize things. So they've been a really great funder and supporter of the work.
Great. Yeah. And it's, I've been checking it out for a while. I haven't gone really deep on it. I think the first time, the deepest I've been on it is when me and you jumped on a call and you kind of guided me through it. So maybe let's start with the origins of D3FEND, since we don't have to go back very far here. What was it? Attack that kind of inspired this? Like we saw kind of the gap or the mirror, or Attack needed a companion. Like, was that the thinking behind this?
Yes. So our thinking was, on defense, we need to understand how the technology works as much as we do on offense, basically, right? So it was sort of this natural idea of well, if you understand in great detail what the adversary is doing at a technical level, you should also understand deeply what the defender is doing. What's the technology that they're buying? What's the specific function it performs? And also, what part of the architecture does it apply to, right? So it was sort of this natural idea that we had as Attack was taking off. This was probably in the 2018 timeframe. Before I came to MITRE, I was actually building commercial detection technology, and I was out often, pitching it, selling it, explaining it, how it works to the security architects who make the buying decisions. And now when I came to MITRE, I was sort of in their shoes, and I was having to look at all sorts of different products, and look at what sort of capabilities and features they offer and try to compare and contrast those. And the sheer complexity of it, even though I was a vendor in the space, was surprising. So for example, consider if you start by looking at 30 products, you whittle it down to 20, you eventually whittle it down to 10. What features are you going to compare across these products? And I found that there was no framework for what do cybersecurity products do at a detailed functional level. And having been a vendor, I knew what all of the various products did, from their marketing at a high level, what they were most proud of, what they thought were their discriminating features. But I didn't know all the meat and potatoes functions that they performed. And that's essential for, building out an architecture to do detection, right?
Yeah. And I love that you're talking about that, because that's, I mentioned we're going to talk about the attack value evals in the some of the vendors got fired up about the latest version that got released. They made some changes to the methodology, and that's actually how I came to start doing this podcast. Was I went to CRA to build product reviews. I felt like that was something that really missing from the market, and I wanted to focus less on like measuring performance and more just on what the product does, what it's like to use it. Like you could have all the capabilities in the world, but if the UX UI is terrible, or there's no API, or there's all kinds of just functional things that we often don't see in some more traditional product reviews that are more focused on how many malwares can it catch, how many behaviors can it see, that kind of more. I don't know the right word for that. The more technical capabilities versus the softer side of how easy is it to use. Is one product require half the amount of labor to use because it's that much easier to use? That's important stuff I would want to know. And you can't tell from the website, right? Like sometimes you start using a product and you're like, yeah, I had no idea it had this feature in it because it's not in the data sheet. It's not in the website. They don't mention it anywhere, but some federal customer needed application control. So Cylance added application control in there. Nobody knows that it's there until you use the product and you're actually doing a demo of it. And you're like, oh, there's more features here.
That's right. And I found that even just those meat and potatoes features can make all the difference. Sometimes we've looked at configurations, for example, and the people who have the product don't even know what it can do. They have certain things turned off, and then they end up getting, a lot more out of their money just by knowing, again, really meat and potatoes stuff. So as we did these comparisons, there was just no functional framework to say, what are you analyzing? Are you analyzing files, network traffic, user behavior, and what type of analysis is it, and how would that compare to another thing? And I like your point about real world performance versus lab performance, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's a lesson that I learned in my other life as a vendor, where you think, you spend years building something and then the lab performance is off the charts, but then you go put it into a SOC, and then you see that like it was actually some other issue that's going to cause the product to fail, like something very simple. So when you got to get out of just purely statistics and think about the whole picture with the performance aspects.
Yeah, for sure. And it's, that's something, speaking of which, I was talking to Frank Duff about the other day, who I don't know if you worked with Frank, but he's over at Tidal Cyber. We're actually going to interview him on the first episode of the new year. I thought it was too bad we couldn't have you guys back to back and have a MITRE X MITRE,
yeah, right, right,
double dose episode. But I understand like that's their goal. They're doing some of that. They're actually mapping out capabilities of some of these products. So I don't know if you're working with them on that, or if that's like if there's some similar goals there. But I'm excited about all of it, because I think it's going to make things so much easier on defenders and practitioners.
100% agree. Yep. And Frank and I we were both at the same MITRE site back in the day. I've since moved, but I enjoyed working with him for sure.
Yeah. So, bring us up to the 1.0 release here. What were the goals for the 1.0 release? And I should ask, like, who is the customer? Who's the ICP? Who's the user of Defend here? Who are you building this for in a security program?
That's a great question. I'll start with the intended audience. So initially, the intended audience was this persona that we call security architects. And the way that we defined that was they're the people who are looking at all the different capabilities. They understand how detection technology works under the hood. They understand how the rules are built, but they're not necessarily the ones writing the rules, if that makes sense. That was the initial audience for Defend, and we did try to make the knowledge base useful to them. And by useful, we mean create distinctions between concepts so that when people compare two things, they get value out of those distinctions, and then they become smarter for it, right? So one thing we do is track, traffic to the website. And up until now, the website's had pretty healthy traffic, continually growing ever since the launch. So in order to make sure that we had a good model that was useful for that persona and their job and their functions, we had to do a lot of modeling behind the scenes. The formal domain of this modeling technique is called Ontology. And this is something we haven't really talked about a lot with Defend. And I would invite anybody to go onto the Google Scholar and type cybersecurity ontology and see how many hits you get. It was into the 6 figures last time I checked.
Really? Wow.
Right. So this has been tried many times. And what this really is just formal modeling of the domain. But cyber, we say cyber changes so fast that it's really hard to build a formal model of this stuff. However, we had this idea that, computers don't change that much actually. and, and you could use advanced knowledge management techniques to model the domain. So I use the term there, knowledge. I want to make a distinction between knowledge and facts. And what we're trying to do with the ontology is model knowledge such that when you're presented with a new piece of information or a fact about a certain thing, you can use the knowledge in the model to contextualize it and make you smarter for it, right? That discipline is in terms of encoding knowledge such that a computer can understand it is ontology. And now you see all of the generative models and AI stuff coming out, right? And that's like a very different approach. That's using statistics. Whereas ontology is more focused on trying to capture what we believe to be true and agreed upon, right? And I, one of the things I like to do with the AI models is, when they give me an answer, I'll reply back in all caps and say like, no, that's 100% wrong. And then it'll be like, yeah, that's wrong. I'm sorry. I won't do it again. And so the point is, right, is like I think that ironically with these new generative models, the field of ontology has never been hotter because it's the way that we agree upon shared truth, right? And then encode that so the computer can understand it. And it might be guardrails or something for an AI to make better recommendations. So we haven't talked about this aspect of DeFend really at all because, again, it's been tried so many times before. We really didn't want to be lumped in with the various attempts. And we took a different approach, though, to a lot of the academic work where what we did was we started building the model from the bottom up instead of the top down, right? So we started with what words and terms do practitioners actually use, and then build the upper model around that, right? A lot of times it would only build like the top part and keep it super high level, and then it doesn't give any information for the practitioner that they might care about, right? So one of the big reasons we didn't talk about this aspect of DeFend for so long is that we didn't give users a way to actually use the ontology. Only really advanced developers would be ones who would take that model, and you could think of it as like a super relational database schema with some magic logic inside to some degree. Only like what we call semantic application developers could take that model and build something with it. And we actually did have a lot of people do that. That's one of the reasons we kept DeFend in beta for so long, was because we didn't want them to think that would be a super stable model for the first few years. So with 1.0, we're excited because we're giving people a way to actually take the ontology and use it with a tool on the website that we call D3FEND CAD, right? So the biggest difference with D3FEND 1.0 and moving forward is that you can actually take the model which sits behind the scenes in D3FEND and use it to describe your specific scenarios and instances, and even build on that model. And so it's actually becoming useful rather than just sort of behind the scenes.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I think it might help to maybe take like an example, a use case of how you would use D3FEND or even CAD in your daily workflow or something like that. Like maybe you're using, there's a new report that comes out describing a ransomware crew and their TTPs or something like that. You want to make sure that you don't have any major gaps there between the stuff that they're doing and your defenses. Or you're reading the DFIR report, which is one of my favorite places to go to for just that same kind of intel, right? The DFIRreport.com. Like what does that look like? How would you would you start with Defend? Like you've got this report, and almost all the reports now, one of the things that's really handy is they're all using those MITRE ATT&CK numbers, right? They're using the T 4-digit numbers, that same numbering system. So, at least we have things somewhat normalized, right? So I imagine that would be a starting point. Walk me through what that looks like.
Sure. I'll actually share the screen here, and we'll take an example where I'll show you what things look like in the graph. And this is sort of not everybody knows also that we've taken attack and we've modeled it against the ontology. So Defend's ontology includes attack for enterprise. So we'll take this attack technique in Defend. You can look it up on the homepage like this, rootkit, which is T1014. And then we can look at Defend's inferred relationships about this. So let's say I wanted to detect a rootkit. What this graphic shows you is that the details of where the rootkit is installed is very important. It could be in firmware. It could modify the kernel itself of a computer, kernel modules, even shared library files. And you can see how the blue boxes, these defensive techniques in Defend, are going to apply to different types of rootkits depending on where it's installed. So if it's in firmware, you might need some firmware verification techniques. If it's modifying a shared library file, maybe an operating system file, you might need to do file integrity monitoring, right? So up until now, this has been sort of the static view of Defend. But with this new tool we're releasing, you can actually take this and build something with it. So there's
already that's that looks pretty useful to me. Like that's it's making the threat mapping piece a lot quicker, right?
Great. So I want to show you what a similar scenario looks like in CAD. This is a new tool. It's on the Defend website now in the 1.0 release. And you can drag these special nodes onto the canvas. So I'll show you kind of what the same thing almost looks like in CAD. We take a rootkit.
So for people listening, it's like a Miro board style tool, like a whiteboard style tool where looks like you can drag things onto it. You can connect things.
Right. So we have this rootkit example, and you'll notice that it's got this special little term here, D3FENC T1014.
That looks like an attack ID, right?
That's right. So now when you have the right type assigned to the node, you can interact with it. So I can right click it. I can look at the artifacts associated with it, and I can add them to my scenario, right? So I can highlight those. I see all the things a rootkit might modify. And then I can customize this, right? There might be a particular rootkit that I'm concerned with. You could put, the hash or whatever you want there. I can also pivot off of this to the defensive techniques associated with it. And this is a similar view. I can also filter on the defensive goals. So for example, if we want to do detection, we might do file integrity monitoring or any of these other techniques, and I can add this to my scenario, right? So The main thing with using this tool is that if you get the right class, you can start to interact with it. So for example, I can also do some cool stuff on the digital artifacts in Defend. These are all the pieces and parts of a computer or computer network, right? So what I like to do is look inside. Let's say you're worried about a kernel. You can explode all the parts and control relationships that a kernel might have. So I might be worried about kernel modules or hardware drivers, right? So I can build out a scenario using Defend as like a generalized template of what does a system prototypically look like. So I'll show a practical example here. This is just demoing a little bit how the tool works.
Yeah.
But let's load a threat intel report that we modeled with D3FEND
Nice.
CAD here, right? So you see a lot more activity going on. This was actually taken from a public report, and you can look at the metadata in the report on CAD to see where we got this. But basically, you see three major types of things. You see these red boxes; these are offensive actions. You see blue boxes, which are defensive actions, and then you see these digital artifacts. So once you zoom in to that sort of execution chain, you can start to see the details of what actually happened with this attack. You could see there was a zip file that was inside of an email attachment, and then you can see that there was an LNK file, right? That a user double clicked, and then all of this bad stuff happened after we did that. You can see, for example, where the recommended YARA rule actually applies from that threat intel report. So obviously, once you start to model things this way, you get insights. Well, the attacker has a lot of execution in the network before my YARA rule might apply. So now I can take that into account in terms of, is this a robust detection? Right.
Right. Right. And I love and the only thing, so the next steps are pretty clear here, which I like. You take those blue boxes and you're like, okay, what machinery, what have I built? What products do I own, that can operationalize these blue countermeasures, right? Or mitigations, whatever you want to call those.
Right. Right. Yeah. And one thought we had was, you build up a library of these scenarios. This is sort of trying to articulately describe the problem that you're trying to solve. Right. And then you have a portfolio of solutions. You need to compare the solutions to the problems. And now you can actually, maybe you can go and do a test and you mark, whether or not the capability performed as you expected. You can start to build that local knowledge base. So there's a lot of features on this tool, and I'm only giving just the real general first look. You can share the graphs, you can embed them in other web pages. So for example, it will give you the HTML code to share this on the internet with other people with an interactive graph like this. We're also looking to do a sort of a blog series next year about all the ways you can use this for all the various different use cases.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is, it's one of these tools that, and I would urge people to look at the video version of this podcast to really kind of grok what's going on here. Because the moment you look at it, because it's visual, I think that's one of the problems with the original kind of attack and defend. Like by default, when you go to the D3FEND website, there are things collapsed because it's a lot. Right. And attack, I forget which column it is. Attack has that one column where if you zoom all the way out so you can see everything at once, it's like looking at a map of ocean depth or something like that. And that's the Mariana Trench. But looking at it in this form, I think this is one of the things that, one of my pet peeves is when a vendor says, okay, like we're going to do a gap analysis based on attack. And, here's the 47 things you don't have a detection for. And the question is like, how relevant are those 47 things? Like, I'm not sure I should build a detection for every single thing that's in the attack framework, because there's stuff in there that's academic, kind of theoretical, like attackers probably aren't going to use it. And I love that. I often recommend this report that Scientia put out, which was a multi-source analysis of top MITRE attack techniques. So they go out, they get a bunch of these reports, like what you've loaded in here, and say, okay, like what are the things attackers are using? What's common across all of them, right? And I'm going to prioritize my detections based off of that. And when I see you building this out, like, if you've got your own intel you're going to use, maybe it's the last 10 incidents that you worked, you load that in here. You say, okay, where are our common weaknesses from our lessons learned from our IR? and you can very quickly, I think, pinpoint that kind of stuff if you use this to map it out.
Yeah, great. Totally agree. And a little peek on where we want to take this, right, is our view is that there are lots of people that the security org could be working better with inside of companies. So like enterprise architects. What's the intersection between security architecture and then enterprise architecture? And you start needing these engineering tools to make sense of the space like this, right?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And it's yeah, there's just so many uses for this, and even kind of practical, like some of these tools, you see them like people will, some of the MITRE projects, I'm like, okay, that's great if I've got somebody on my team that can just spend all time just kind of fiddling with models and building stuff based on this. But this is something, you could use, like if you wanted to get something useful done in 15 minutes, you could do it with this. Like if you saw a new threat comes out that you get alerted about, you can you could build this out in 15 to 30 minutes, put it into a PowerPoint and say, okay, here's our plan based off of that, which is very cool. It makes it a much more, I don't know the correct word here, tactical tool than something that's just, kind of more academic and strategic.
Right. One of the challenges with things like formal models in cybersecurity is how do you incentivize people to correctly categorize something? Because that comes at a cost. They have to understand the categories. It's complicated. And what's also the benefit of that? Oftentimes it's hypothetical benefit. So one of the things that we're focused on is, when you get the right category correct, right? We try to make selecting the right category interesting, so you can kind of get a sense of where is the thing that I'm interested in the various hierarchy of categories. But then the benefit of that is once you get the right category, you can start to interact with that thing, right? You can defend the node, right? Once it's got the right definition, and then you see, so this is the point of the categorization is I know that, if I want to do detection and I've got an email, I might want to do dynamic analysis or even sender reputation analysis, and I can build on my scenario like this, right? So we have a lot of cool stuff planned for this. This is our first, real step toward how do you put Defend into action, right? And getting it beyond just a website that people think of it as, right?
Yeah, and kind of my next step with this, again, kind of brings me back to title is like I would want to, one of the things I have a big concern about is we have so many products now, and there's overlap between some of those products. So like diving more into those blue boxes, into the actual your actual capabilities to deal with the attacks and the artifacts and detect them, observability, all that stuff, is understand, okay, what are my options? Because in some cases, like I remember working at one organization and realizing we had 3 stateful firewalls in a row in the path in an organization, and 3 separate, completely separate departments within security and IT managed each of those stateful firewalls. So that made troubleshooting just an absolute mess. But also the flip side of that is there's probably a lot of overlap with all the tools we have. There's like if somebody gets an LNK file or something like that, you can probably take just one of these different attack actions and find half a dozen different ways to detect it, prevent it, and it would be good to kind of be able to pull those out, like maybe program those in somewhere, like I've got these, here's all the tools I have, here's all the capabilities they have, and then link it into that graph. So that's where my brain goes from here, is like, okay, like maybe I don't know off the top of my head every place I can do email filtering or outbound filtering or content filtering or something like that. Like there's all kinds of different filtering controls built into everything these days. I would want to get those capabilities kind of connected into here is the next place that my brain kind of goes. So I don't know if you're thinking about that at all.
Yeah. One area that's fascinating to me is how many enterprise tools that are not like cyber specific could perform these functions that your enterprise might already have.
Right. Yeah. It's not even a
So you don't
security
have
tool
to.
necessarily.
Yeah. So it's more about maximizing what the fundamental capabilities that your IT stack has versus just bolting on, all of the things. Right.
Exactly. Yeah, I actually used to do a workshop called InfoSec Island, where the whole idea was if you're stranded on an island and you're trying to protect against attacks, and all you have to protect yourself is Windows. All you have to protect Windows is Windows itself. Like it's got a lot of capabilities built in these days. Back in 2000 or something like that, it didn't have a host firewall. It didn't have a VPN client. It didn't have application control. Like none of that stuff was built in, but over the last 25 years, there's a ton of security controls in there. And there's a lot you can do with configurations too. So I like this idea of, okay, what are the, and having options is great because maybe one of them is less overhead to manage. Maybe one of them is less painful for your users, introduces less friction. Maybe one of them allows you to stop paying for a product. Maybe you've got so much overlap, you can let something go.
I love it. Imagine if this could help make SE Linux easier to configure,
Yes.
then that would be a real brass ring, right?
Yeah, like there's so much good stuff out there that people just don't unlock because there's so much complexity. They don't understand it, or they don't understand the impact it could have, right? And this would help them understand the impact that some of these tools, some of these products might have.
I also want to do a shout out to the CWE project at MITRE. We have modeled CWE inside of our ontology, some of it, so you can actually get really specific. I know in this example, we're talking about emails and things like that, but you can also model even at a low level sort of software functions, weaknesses against those functions, and then specify what you want the developers to do about it. So not really, so anyone doing development, we're looking at modeling at that level of detail because weaknesses really get after the exploitation side, which we still think some people have to worry about, right? Not everybody, but some people do. So, so when you drag a vulnerability onto the canvas, you can search through all the weaknesses,
Oh, very cool.
Buffer overflow, right? Things like this.
If you're listening to this and not looking at the video version, you got to check it out. Watch it again on YouTube, or listen to it again, but with visuals. Very visual tool. I love this, Peter. I just saw Patrick Garrity, I think this morning, release some analysis of the top CWEs for 2024. I think it was. So like there's so much good stuff happening out there, good research that you can just import into this tool that you can pull in here and everybody's got too much going on, so all this ability to prioritize things and focus on things. We need more tools like these. So thank you, Peter.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah. And thanks for coming on the podcast as well. We will be right back in a few moments with the next segment. But thank you again for coming on, Peter, and demoing the new D3FEND CAD product. And also real quick before we wrap up, do you have anything coming up, any webcasts or demos or anything like that in the new year that you want to tell people about?
Yeah, we're working on some and hope to announce them soon. So.
Okay, excellent. Yeah, thanks again, Peter.
Thanks for the invite. Pleasure to talk to you.
All right, we'll be right back in a few moments.